Hey guys, subscribe for daily knife content. And if you're shopping for knives and gear, make sure you check out the description of the video you're watching right now for links to some great online retailers. There's also individual links for knives that I personally recommend. Thanks! What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got a very special custom knife overview and presentation to share with you guys. This is the stunningly gorgeous Herman Knives Slim #1 in Timascus and Damacore. This is a custom knife. It is very, very expensive. If you're not familiar with my channel, generally what I do is I do a full review. I give some factual information about the specs, and I give my opinions on value and who I think it's going to be good for, who I think may not like it as much. This is really, really expensive. So right off the bat, I'm going to tell you guys, this particular version of this knife is a $2,500 knife. Now, that's not to say that all Herman Slims cost that much. Actually, the base version of this knife comes in at just $660, which is still very expensive, but nowhere near as expensive as this. So I'm going to be making some, give you guys some factual information about this, and then I'll give some opinions, but this is not really a review. When we talk about custom knives on this channel, I really just like to share it with you guys and give you guys my thoughts. At some point, I would love to do a review on a basic version of this knife, one that's a little bit more obtainable to people like me, because admittedly, I cannot afford something like this. But my goodness, is it beautiful. And it is, despite it being an object that is not easily obtainable for the vast majority of people, it is still just absolutely amazing, and I can't wait to share it with you guys. This knife was sent to me by at Sierra Bound on Instagram. Please give this person a follow. It's because of him that I'm able to bring you guys daily knife content. It's also because of my generous patrons. Thanks so much for supporting me. You can find a link for my Patreon down in the description, and please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. Scott, or at Sierra Bound, actually sent me multiple custom knives, and without people like Scott, there's no way that I could bring this to the channel and share it with you guys. So this is made by custom knife maker. Is it Batosh Herman? I am so sorry if I mispronounced your name. I'm so sorry about that. Out of Poland, and these are available, I think, almost exclusively at Polish Custom Knives. So they've got some other Herman models available there, and they've got a wide variety of custom knives. So if you're into that type of stuff, definitely check out Polish Custom Knives. But yeah, now this is a maker who uses some CNC, but as you can see here, there is a substantial amount of work in this knife. One way or another, there is a lot more work that goes into something like this than your standard production knives. Now he likes to use, in this case, we have Damacore and Timascus, or a titanium Damascus. But on the more standard production models, we're looking at like titanium and M390. And he also has informed me that he likes to use the new and very mysterious M398 steel, which we'll talk a little bit about here in a little bit. I've never actually handled anything in M398, but that's very, very interesting. Yeah, let's go ahead and do, let's get a measurement on this guy. Overall length of the Herman Slim is coming in at 8.75 inches overall. I got to tell you guys, that's kind of surprising. The presence of this knife is not that of a massive, like I've handled knives that are obviously close to 9 inches before, and they seem to have much more. It's like, it's very obvious that I'm holding a much larger. This knife has really good balance. It's got an incredible blade to handle ratio, and it's not super thick. So it doesn't really have that. Does that sound pretentious? It doesn't have the presence of a large knife. Sorry if that sounds pretentious, but yeah, that's what I'm feeling. 8.75 inches overall. Blade length is coming in an amazing 3.8 inches, and the cutting edge coming in just barely over 3.75. Really cool. Let's go ahead and do some size comparisons with a couple of knives here up against the Ontario Rat Model 1. And whoops, I picked up the Pair of 3 Ontario Rat Model 2. A lot of people are like, why do you compare a full custom knife with a... Because these are easily recognizable, right? So Ontario Rat 1 and 2, you can see it's absolutely longer than the Rat 1 and Rat 2. How about up against the Spyderco PM2 and Spyderco Para 3? You can see they're definitely larger than both, but again, in terms of height, no, it's not a super tall blade. And last but not least, let's compare to the Benchmade Griptilian, or in this case, the Ritter Hogue, and its little brother, the Mini Griptilian. So again, you can see there, it's long, but not overly slender. It's just not overly tall or thick. Let's go ahead and normally I'd say let's do a hardware check, but number one, there's no way I'm touching this beautiful thing with my tools, so I'm not going to be doing that today. But I will tell you guys the screws back here look to be T6. So if you're going to pick one of these up, I mean, the production model probably has the same type of hardware. You've got a couple of T6 screws back here in the pocket clip. You've got 3 back here. The interesting thing is they go all the way through. So this still is, by my standards, minimal hardware. Something I really appreciate is the screws go all the way through, but he has actually rounded the tips of the screws off, which I think looks really good. Some people are going to be quick to point out that means the threads are on the inside of the titanium. Isn't that a bad thing? I've mentioned this multiple times. Talking with Greg Geckel from Quest Custom Knives, he says that, well, having, in a situation where you have a steel screw going into a titanium frame, yeah, the titanium threads are going to be softer than the steel. So if you were to strip it out and damage the threads in the titanium, you'd have a problem because you'd technically have to replace the titanium. But that's incredibly, incredibly unlikely. As long as you've got at least, I think you said 3 or 4 threads, it's going to be so secure in there, even in and out multiple times. It's just really, really unlikely. And this has substantially more than 3 or 4 threads locking in between the screw and the frame. Honestly, I just don't really care about that. I just like how this looks. The little steel, they just look like little steel beads, right? And they're rounded. I don't know. I think stuff like that is really cool. So I don't really have a problem with that. This has a proprietary pivot, so you need a special tool to get into it. I mean, maybe on the standard version, that might be kind of an issue for some people because you might want to disassemble your knife. I'm going to imagine, I don't know this for a fact, I'm going to imagine that he does make a tool for it, or that there's some sort of service where if this needs work or repair, there's probably some way where you can, if you purchase something like this, there's a way to get into it. But I would have liked to see just a standard pivot. I will say, though, this looks cool. It looks awesome. It's polished and has this kind of golden teal anodizing. I'm going to guess that that's titanium, and obviously in contrast with the beautiful Timascus scales. Listen, I know Timascus is not going to be visually appealing for everybody, but coming from somebody who generally enjoys completely and totally monochromatic looks in knives, for whatever reason, I love, it's like, if there's going to be busyness, go all out. And I'll tell you what, this is busy and it's definitely all out. I like the extreme ends of things, and this is definitely on the extreme busyness end in terms of like the color and the patterns. Oh my gosh. Yes. When Scott showed this to me, that was the first, I was like, that is beautiful. I would love to look at that. Holy cow. So yeah, I do like this, but I completely understand this isn't going to be everybody's aesthetic choice. Keep in mind, again, Mr. Herman does make more basic versions of this knife. You're not forced to get something that is incredibly extravagant and complex on the aesthetic. And you're also not forced to buy the most expensive version of it. That's just the form that this one has taken. And I happen to really, really like it. What the heck are we talking about here? Oh yeah, hardware. Okay. So moving on past the hardware, let's go ahead and this is obviously a knife that is beautiful, but it is because of the profile. And after talking with Mr. Herman, who was really nice, I contacted him on Instagram. Yeah, this is 100% designed to be used. Again, there's a less expensive version of it, and this was designed with the end user in mind. So I think that carry profile might be beneficial for some people. It is just ever so slightly thicker than the Para 3, but not by much. And it's also contoured, which is fantastic. I'm obviously being very careful with this, trying not to let it touch. I know some people are like, it's a knife, right? But it's not my knife. I did not buy this. So I'm going to be careful with it. It's somebody else's property. Length and height up against the Spyderco PM2 and Para 3. You can see here that this is long and slender. It's about the same length as a PM2, nowhere near the same height, even including the flipper tab. So it's not all that thick either. So really, despite this being a fairly large knife, it's just really not all that, I mean, as far as something you're going to keep in your pocket, it's really not all that cumbersome. Let me show you guys the inside of it here real quick. You can get my flashlight down in the description. Let me turn it, we're a little bright today. See on the inside here, it has been milled out. So it actually does have some weight-saving elements. Another thing I'm not going to touch with my tools is the blade. The blade looks to be honestly a little bit thinner. Yeah, it's quite a bit thinner. I'm going to guess this is probably somewhere around 125 thousandths, which is the same thickness as the Ritter Hogue here. That's what it looks to be. Probably between 115 and 125 thousandths, so it's not an overly thick blade. We'll go ahead and weigh it. Sorry, I've got my notebook on top of my scale here. Let me move that. Stuff flying all over the place. Weight on this guy, and I would imagine it might vary just a little bit depending on what materials are used, right? But a titanium or Timascus version of this knife comes in at a totally reasonable 4.27 ounces. That's not a weight that bothers me. It might bother you, but it certainly doesn't bother me. Blade length, obviously, this is not going to be legal in some areas, so use your best judgment there. Yeah, as far as a knife that is 8.75 inches overall, I don't think that's bad at all. In fact, it's actually pretty impressive. Moving on here, let's talk about the aesthetic. So not only is the entire this is my opinion on the aesthetic. This profile is gorgeous. I don't really like excessive aggressive lines. Like when like the flipper tab is way down here and there's a big ramp up here and there's a big thing and there's a big stopper back here on the back. I like more of a straight line aesthetic. So this is very, very beautiful to me. You guys know that I love contouring, and that is absolutely the case here. It is beautifully done. Edges are beautifully chamfered. Very, very beautiful. You can see this beautiful CNC work. We have a texturing on the scales, which I just love. Some people aren't going to want the texturing, but I love it. Oh my gosh. The way the light bounces off this stuff, right? I mean, the Timascus. Let me get my gross fingerprints off of this. Sorry. The camera, by the way, will never do this type of stuff justice. It will never, ever do this justice. In person, this is so much more vibrant, if you can imagine. This is just beautiful, and you can see there up close how well everything is nicely knocked down, how well everything is fitted. Everything is just beautifully positioned. Look at this backspacer back here. Timascus backspacer, Timascus pocket clip, right? Pivot collar, absolutely beautiful. The polishing that's going on the non-choke side of the pivot, it is wonderful. On top of that, we have just hand-melting ergonomics. Oh, man, is this comfortable. I mean, it does lock you in. We have what I always talk about. I don't like to be confined by certain lines. I like it when knives make a suggestion. Place your hands here or somewhere near, right? Wherever you're comfortable. And you can do that, right? You can move back. And while this area, if you choke back, does cause your pinky to slide off a little bit, it is fantastically, I mean, it's wonderfully comfortable in this position. But in the primary position where you're going to hold this knife, it's just beautiful. You're not that far from the cutting edge. There's no jimping back here, but I don't think it really needs it. Sorry about that. Had to cut the video. But anyways, as I was saying, there is nothing in the cutting path right here. So while, like I was saying, you're not too far from it, basically making a cut straight down or slicing or whatever. You're going to be able to make full use of that edge. And this area up here does act as a bit of a sharpening tool. So that's nice. I mean, I don't know, when you're sharpening it, somebody who has more experience sharpening, versus me, this area back here will, I think, what you call smile a little bit. I don't know. It's really, it's one of those situations where I'm looking at this custom knife and thinking, me personally, I would just want to have it and enjoy it. But if you had the less expensive version, right, and you actually plan to go out and use it, then that is definitely something that's going to affect you, or people with varying sharpening experience perhaps over time. But for the most part, I think you're going to be able to make full use of this beautiful blade. And speaking of the blade, we're going to talk about the material here in just a second. The profile of the blade is excellent. We have a you do actually have, let me see if I can see here. Do we have a little bit of a flat? No, it actually is fully flat ground. And that's great. I actually really here I am. I'm going to compare a rat to this beautiful knife. I like fully flat ground blades that are not super thick on the spine because they tend to pass through material with ease, right? Now, what are you talking about, Metal Complex? What's your experience with stuff like this? Well, as I've stated before, generally what I use my knives for is just regular stuff. right? Cutting open boxes and freaking just dumb thing. I mean, like not dumb things, but just stuff that normal people do with knives, right? I mean, you need to make a cut on cardboard or wood or rope or rubber or, some sort of plastic packaging. You get out your pocket knife. That's what I do with my knives, right? Do I need something like this to do something like that? Absolutely not. But it sure does make it a lot more fun. It just does, right? I'm sure so, I always have people tell me like it doesn't need to be fun. It doesn't need to be fun, right? I mean, you can make an argument nothing needs to be fun, right? But using something like this, if it were mine and I could afford it and I wasn't afraid to use it, using something like this for something simple like cutting open a box, for me, it makes it infinitely more interesting and fun, right? Anyways, beautiful flat ground blade. You can see here that the angle of the blade is consistent and then it takes a dramatic change right here. I honestly don't know what the benefit, is when you're cutting. Perhaps that does add some sort of benefit. What it definitely does is tapers out to a pretty thin tip. So if you're going to puncture or breach with something like, if you're going to use this to puncture or breach, I would imagine it will make tasks like that pretty simple and straightforward. It's definitely going to do that. This is stupidly thin behind the edge. It is very, let's see if we can get up. Yeah. Oh boy, that is quite the laser beam. Oh my goodness, that is thin. Absolutely. So something in this geometry, right? Obviously the composition of the blade, the heat treat is going to affect exactly how it performs. But, those of you who have cut with something ultra thin like an Opinel know that regardless of the fact that the steel on that knife is not incredibly premium, the geometry itself adds an enormous amount of advantage in terms of, I guess we can call it high speed, low drag, right? In terms of just ease of cutting, the geometry itself is going to be massively beneficial. But in this case, it is backed up by the hyper exotic Damacore steel, which is proprietary to the Damacore company. What is Damacore? Recently, I actually did a video, if you'd like to check it out, the difference between Damascus, Core Damascus, Damasteel, and Damacore. Those are all different things. This is very different from Damascus. Not going to go into detail there. If you want to know the difference between all that stuff, you can check out that video. Essentially what this is, and you can check this information out on the Damasteel website. We have a core, which you can see right here on the spine here. You can see all the layers of the Damascus, or in this case, actually a Damasteel jacket. We have a core in here of N11X, which is very similar, if not, I don't know this factually, but extremely similar. Let's say extremely similar to Vanax, right? N11X that's specific to the Damasteel company, right? So that's the core. So as far as I understand, the core is going to perform, or the edge is going to perform very similarly to Vanax, which a lot of you guys know is an excellent steel. I think it's nearly, impenetrable in terms of corrosion. I don't think it can corrode, and if it can, it's very unlikely. And then in this case, we have a jacket. This is sort of a Sanmai style steel. We have a jacket of Damasteel. So Damasteel itself can actually be formed into a very functional blade. In fact, my Evo Typhoon is made out of Damasteel. So in this case, the jacket is Damasteel, and you can see there the layers in the Damasteel. And that's two different powder steels. I mean, the Vanax or the N11X core is powder formed, and then the jacket is also a combination of RWL34 and what is it? I have it written down over here, PMC27. Which is also a powder steel. That PMC27 can be turned into a blade by itself, but it is actually not available as a standalone steel. It is only available in combination with RWL34 to make Damasteel, which again is the jacket. What's the benefit there? The idea with stuff like this is apparently to add benefit where the core steel is lacking, or just to stack additional benefits on top. I think the idea here is that it creates, I guess, potentially additional toughness. There are a ton of variables, and I am nowhere near educated enough to give you guys the exact information on this. What I can tell you is that it's very interesting. To somebody like me who's an enthusiast, even though I'm not, professionally educated on something like this, it's very interesting how this all comes together. And it looks amazing. God, it looks amazing. I think the primary thing to point out here is that this looks like something that is either not meant to be used or that can't be used. I think oftentimes people look at stuff like this and they assume that it is a pure art knife, meaning something that looks beautiful, but if you actually took it out to use it, it would fall apart. No, this is titanium Damascus. This is Damacore with a core of N11X and the jacket of Damasteel. It is beautiful. The form that it takes is beautiful, but it is 100% functional. In fact, it's very performance oriented. The blade geometry is extremely well suited for continuous cutting. And that's N11X or Van X core is going to be fantastic in terms of corrosion resistance and cutting performance. And then the additional toughness of the jacket is going to also be beneficial during use. How beneficial? Measurably beneficial, right? I mean, in terms of like dollar for dollar over steels like, you know, that you might find in a substantially less expensive knife, right? Are you going to get that much more performance out of it? Probably not, but that's not all of as far as what you're paying for the knife. Like if you're valuing just the performance of it and you don't care about these extra elements, then it's probably not going to be worth it to you. But largely what you're paying for on top of the performance of Damasteel is the complexity and the work that goes into it, and of course the final aesthetic form that it takes, which I find very appealing. And in the case of this knife, the combination of everything here. So yeah, that's where the cost comes from. There's a lot of work that goes into this. There's a lot of work by default or extra processes that go into making things like Timascus and Damacore, and then getting them all fit together, you know, where they take a final form that is beautiful and functional and elegant, and, you know, all the tolerances are incredible, right? It's kind of like I'm speaking in generalities and kind of dancing around exactly what makes this knife worth exactly $2,500. Well, it's one of those things where, you know, somebody who appreciates all these elements is going to pay for something like this. There is a huge market for stuff like this. And obviously, you know, the versions, not like there's lots of stuff out there that takes a form like this, but the stuff that stands out, that's the stuff that people want, right? The stuff that really stands out, and all of those elements come together to create something truly masterful and, you know, really, I don't know. This particular one speaks so much to me. You know, out of everything that I've seen lots of stuff in combination of Damacore and Timascus, but when the ergonomics are good, right, and the aesthetic lines are all pleasing to me, it makes me want to spend that type of money on something like this a lot more, right, when all of those elements come together. So yeah, stuff like this is definitely going to cost more money to make, more time goes into it, but ultimately the person who decides to buy it, right, the people who are going to pay for something like this, they are going to see value in it individually. They're going to see their own value in it and be willing to pay for something like this, right? Anyways, yeah, the blade is incredible. So what about the action? Now, I'm going to tell you guys, I don't know if this is intentional. Sorry, I'm cleaning this off because I just really, the aesthetic of this, how it looks is so important. I have no idea if this is intentional, but this one, I'm going to let you guys listen. It kind of sings. I don't know if they're all like that. I've heard blades squeak before, and it's usually the product of something getting trapped between the ball and the, like I had a Medford knife where I opened it and closed it and I could hear it going, and it was something trapped between the detent ball and the surface of the blade. Maybe that's what's going on here. Or maybe it's an element that's supposed to, I don't know. Whatever it is, even if it's by accident, I gotta admit, that sounds cool. It sounds like, you know, when they say like when you swing a sword through the air and it sings, like as it slices through the air, the sword sings. That's kind of what I'm getting here. So if it was by accident or it's not supposed to do that, that's a happy accident because it sounds really good. Now, beyond the sound, it's very clicky, right? It's very smooth, and that flipper tab is wonderful. It looks like it's kind of a sharp beak, but truthfully, it's one of those flipper tabs where there's really just one position to pull it from, and you pull it and it's going to snap into place. It's beautifully smooth, very controlled. Right there at the end, sorry. I'm at an angle here. It doesn't look like I'm at an angle, but I'm actually at an angle, so getting at that last little bit. It's very smooth. There are no inconsistencies. in the surfaces. That's how I judge a good action. A lot of people judge, like, is it totally false shut? I don't judge a quality action like that. I don't care so much that it's false shut. In fact, I've said this many times. I actually prefer that it's more controlled because I've cut myself many times on blades that are a little bit too false shutty, right? A blade can be false shut, but have horrible inconsistencies in the surface, right? The bumpiness and bleh. I mean, does that make a huge difference in terms of the close to the open position? Well, no. I mean, it's going to open. The knife doesn't have to have incredible action to be functional. But man, is it satisfying when it's consistent all the way down. Oh, it's just, everything is so smooth. Oh, that's great. It's very satisfying to deploy. There's no lock stick. There's no detent lash. There's no double clutch. Oh, it's great. It's really, really nice. I love how that feels. It's wonderful. Definitely the type of action that I would guess is fully acceptable. I mean, again, I don't have a ton of experience with knives that cost this much, but if I was going to spend that much on a knife and this was the action, this was the action that was on it, I'd be perfectly happy. It's wonderful. I can easily say that this is one of the most satisfying actions that I felt. I felt a lot of knives. Felt a lot of knives with amazing action on this channel, right? This is definitely up there in top tier, right? Anyways, I love how they do this how the backspacer comes to this little, central point, how it meets up, kind of like an arrow shooting down the back of the blade. I love how that looks. The pocket clip is very simple and kind of popsicle stick style, but I think it does go with the lines on the knife. You can see there's a little area cut out there underneath the pocket clip, and I don't know if that's meant to be an area where the pocket can actually fall, or your pocket can fall into place. There's more room in it. I don't know. This has that continuous ramp at the end, so while it is flat up on top, it should rise to meet just about any thickness of pocket seam, so that's great. It's also nicely rounded down here and not sharp, and because it's flat, you basically can't feel it. It's low profile, it's flat, I can't feel it. Something else that I appreciate is that this is a titanium countersunk liner lock. It's a Timascus titanium countersunk liner lock. The freaking liner lock is titanium. It's insane. Or Timascus, I mean. So that's awesome, and I love that. I've said this many times. I actually have come to prefer this style of lock over a frame lock because it's not exposed. So it doesn't matter where you put your hands. You can just flip it. It's always going to flip exactly right. I mean, it's wonderful. There is a lock bar insert in there, and the lock bar insert is tungsten carbide. So that's awesome, very hard. That's going to reduce lock wear over time, and it's really cool. Generally, you see a steel lock bar insert, but you get tungsten carbide with this. That's pretty sweet. The bearings are ceramic, and yes, there are hardened steel washers underneath the bearings to keep the bearings from riding directly on titanium. So that's fantastic. Basically, all the elements that you'd want to be there to make this thing last over time. Timascus is not going to corrode. The Vanex core in here it's very unlikely that it will corrode, especially, with the combination of the extra stainless qualities of the Damascus steel. Everything on this knife is set up for longevity, right? So if you want to use it or you want to appreciate it as, a piece that you mount in a display case, it's definitely set up for longevity, right? It's fantastic. The cutout there, the access to this thing is plentiful. There is a little bit of texturing in here, but nothing is sharp. None of this is sharp. That means that for you folks out there who are like me and like to sit around and fidget with stuff like this on the couch, oh, you can do this all day. It's so minimal. It's so comfortable. There's such minimal effort. Handling this custom version makes me desperately want to handle one of the more obtainable production variants because I got lots of knives in the $600 to $700 area that I love to use. So I would not shy away from using it, but all of these little elements really equate to a really well-designed knife, one that I would just be an absolute joy to use. I would be too protective over something this beautiful to actually use it, despite the fact that you definitely can. But gosh, it makes me want to experience a much less expensive slim and actually go out and use it because everything here just screams a fantastic knife. I mean, this is a professional cutting tool that even the most basic version of this is overkill in a fantastic way. Does that make sense? Like, it's so not many people really need this amazing of a cutting tool, but man, like this, carrying and using something like this, talk about pride of ownership. Beautiful. Every last element of this is designed for the end user. There's even rounding there on the blade, wraps nicely around the stop pin. It's just fantastic. No blade play up, down, left, or right. I mean, I feel like that's silly to talk about, but if you were wondering, no. And of course, it is laser perfect on the centering. This is massively impressive. I gotta admit, I had not heard of Mr. Herman up to this point. I just not heard of him. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not saying, it's just there's a lot of people out there making knives, and I'm just not aware of everybody. But I'm definitely aware now. I am definitely going to be keeping my eyes and ears open because this is fantastic. This design is 100% right up my alley. I do wish that the hardware was a larger size. But gosh, other than that, I mean, I can't say that there's a whole lot here that I dislike. I mean, would it be nice to have a pivot, especially on the the less expensive version that I would actually take out and use? Would it be nice to have a Torx pivot? Well, yeah, it'd be nice if it was T8, T8, T8. I say that all the time. But as is the case with other knives that I review, that's never a deal breaker. That's just something I go, I wish it was different, but it isn't, so okay. This is gorgeous. It is very straightforward and functional. Limitations on, this with people are basically the price. Even the less expensive version is still really, really pricey. But if the less expensive version basically feels exactly the same as this, it's just titanium in either M390 or M398, which, by the way, somebody wondering, sorry, down here in the basement, so we get to hear the water. Somebody wondering, what's M398? I've never heard of that. It is meant to be an upgrade in terms of edge retention over M390. It is definitely a very new super steel. Not very many people are working with it, but apparently Herman Knives works with it. And I think this geometry, basically the elements of the composition of M398 would be massively benefited by this incredible cutting geometry. Obviously not, this isn't a tough cutting geometry, and M398 is actually less tough, apparently, than M390, and M390 is not known for being tough. So the blade isn't going to be this big, ultra-durable, wedge of steel like what you'd get on a big cold steel knife, but in terms of performance cutting and basically low-drag cutting, yeah, it's going to be ideal for that on top of puncture tasks, which is basically what we do with our knives in everyday, just regular EDC scenarios. So that's fantastic, right? Where was I going with something? There was something I was going with here, but there's very little to complain about. I really want to handle a less expensive one because I'm actually, now that I know it exists, that's something I personally want to own. I want to own one of the less expensive, more plain, just kind of the monochromatic titanium and M390 versions of this. Yeah, I can definitely see myself spending my own money on something like that. That just absolutely sounds wonderful. I'm taking a look at every last little thing here, making sure that there's nothing that I missed and looking over my notes. But no, guys, I don't know that there's really anything else I can touch on here. This was a super long video, as it tends to be the case when I talk about custom knives because there's so much that I want to say. Yeah, a lot of this was eye-candy. I hope that this was entertaining for you guys. Mr. Herman, I hope there was nothing that I missed. Same with you, Scott, Sierra_bound on Instagram. I hope there was nothing that I missed. This is easily one of my favorite knives that I have ever looked at on this channel. This is going to be going in 2 playlists. It'll be going in my custom knives playlist, custom and semi-custom knives, and it's also going to be going on my favorite knives of all time playlist. The only reason that this is not going in my most recommended knives playlist is because this particular version that you're seeing right here is extremely expensive and vastly out of the ballpark for most people's budgets. Right now, if I get a chance to handle a less expensive version, then I could imagine that easily going in recommended knives. So just so we're clear, yeah, I think if you decide to spend the money on something like this, I think you'll be extremely happy and extremely satisfied. Yeah, I think that's about all that I can say. I hope that I got everything there. So anyways, be sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. If you guys enjoyed this video, please leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.